Hello and welcome to my business strategy course. My name is Oliver Gottschall, and over the course of the next 15 sessions, I will be giving you an introduction into strategic planning and strategic management. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. In today's introductory session, I would like to answer three questions. The first is, what actually is strategy? The second is, why do we need a strategy? Why do companies need a strategy? And the third one is, who is actually the audience of a good strategy? Towards the end of the session, I will be giving you an overview of what to expect for the rest of this course. So let's jump right into it and start with the definition of strategy. And a good starting point for this is always to go back to the roots of the word, or the origin of the word. The word strategy comes from two Greek words, ancient Greek words. The word hostratos, which means the army, and argein, which means to lead. So literally, strategy means to lead an army, and obviously we want to lead the army to victory in the war. So you will see that we are in the realm of war terminology here, and a lot of the terminology that we will use is actually coming from that war terminology. For example, to attack or counter-attack, or when we talk about the moat that protects us from competition. So all of this is war terminology. But as we talk about business strategy, we need a bit of a more peaceful definition as well. And here I would like to refer to the definition of Hitt, Island, and Hoskisson. They define strategy as the integrated and coordinated set of commitments and actions designed to exploit core competencies with the aim of gaining a competitive advantage. So there are really three parts to this definition. And if you allow me to take them apart briefly. The first part is a set of commitments and actions, and that is nothing else but a plan. So a strategy is a plan. Integrated and coordinated here means that the plan must be integrated across all the functions of a company and also coordinated across all the different departments of a company. The second point focuses on the weapons that we will use to put our strategy in place. And that is our strength, our core competencies that we have. So we will try to use our core competencies as weapons against the competition. And finally, we talk about the goal of the strategy, and that is to gain a competitive advantage. So basically to be better than the competition. There are a couple of other definitions of strategy, but you will see they are all fairly similar. Chandler in 1963, he focuses on long-run goals. So a strategy is something that is long-term and defines the objectives of an enterprise and the courses of action to achieve those goals and objectives. Porter talks about strategy as being different from competition and choosing those activities that deliver a unique mix of value to the customer. For Mintzberg in 2007, strategy is simply a pattern in a stream of decisions. And Johnson defines strategy as a long-term direction of an organization. So all of these definitions fairly similar. The next question now is, why do we actually need a strategy? And if you allow me to rephrase this, why do companies need a strategy today more than at any time before? What has changed over the past decades that makes having a strategy so important? Now, there have been four forces. Two of them have been there for a very long time, basically forever. And two of these forces are fairly recent and fairly new. And here are the four forces, or the four challenges that businesses face today. Two of these challenges in the lighter color here are economic cycles and product life cycles. Well, economic cycles are the ups and downs of the economy, and this has always been there. And product life cycles, basically from the product development to the boom of a product to the product decline, where sales go down and the product is not so interesting for customers anymore. So companies have to manage through these economic cycles, and they have to manage through their product life cycles and come up with new products and with innovation to revive their product portfolio. Now, the things that are relatively new here are globalization and technological advancement. And these two forces actually make strategy so important for a company nowadays. And let me elaborate a little bit why that is. Talking about globalization first. There are pros and cons of globalization. There's benefits, positive impact on companies, and negative impact on companies. And I would claim that both the positives and the negatives are important to be addressed in a good strategy. When we talk about the benefits briefly, benefits of globalization obviously is that companies now have access to global product markets, so a much larger customer base. Trade barriers are reduced, so both the shipping cost, but also, of course, the customs are being reduced, and therefore it becomes cheaper to trade internationally. Companies now have access to a global supplier base, and therefore also to the skills and also the resources of those suppliers. And this can also lead to cost reduction, for example, by leveraging global labor markets with maybe lower labor rates than in the home country. And of course, finally, the opportunity for international cooperations or cooperating with international partners that maybe didn't exist some 50, 60 years ago. Challenges, of course, are that companies now have to face global competition. You cannot just look across the street at your local competitor. You have to compare yourself with global companies with very different resources, capabilities, and also economic contexts they are in. Also, there's higher exposure to global risks, and very specifically to political and economic risks. So both benefits and challenges. But both of them have an impact on strategy and need to be addressed by a good strategy. When we're moving on to technological advancement, looking at household penetration rates of products. I think this is a good indicator to see how fast technological advancement is moving nowadays compared to a couple of decades ago. Take the automobile, for example. It took 60 years from the invention of the automobile to reaching 25% of US households. The telephone was a little bit faster. There it took about a little bit less than 40 years to reach 25% of US households. But look at what happened recently. TV already took only 20 years, but then more recent technologies like internet, mobile phone, PC took like less than 20 years to reach 25% of US households, and it's getting faster and faster. And that is also represented on the next page, which looks at technological advancement over time. So starting from the 1970s to the early 2000s. And you see that in the 1970s, color TV or basic cable, the growth rates were fairly flat. And as we move into the 1990s and into the 2000s, the growth rates of the new technologies that come in are much, much faster. So they spread much faster and have a much wider reach in a quicker time horizon. So it becomes more and more paramount for companies to be on top of the technology and to have solid plans in place to address competition that brings in new technology. Finally, we have to ask ourselves, are there companies that are more in need of a strategy than others? And Greenwald and Kahn, in their 2005 book, Demystifying Competition, answer this question. And they start out with all markets and ask the first question, do you have a competitive advantage? Are there competitive advantages in the market? If there's no competitive advantage and all companies basically have the same resources and have the same kind of capabilities and compete for the same customer base, then there's only one way, and that is to be operational effective. That means efficiency, 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 and reducing cost and gaining ground over the competition by being just the most efficient company in the market. But if there are competitive advantages, then the next question is there something like a single dominant firm? Single dominant firm, for example, could be Microsoft, yeah, in the software and computer systems market. If there is a single dominant firm, then the question is it you or is it others? If it's you, then that's fantastic, because then you just have to manage your competitive advantage. You are in a very advantageous position already, so you just have to manage it and make sure that no one else catches up to that. If you are in the other buckets and you don't have that competitive advantage, then Greenwald and Kahn propose that the best thing is to exit the market gracefully, because if there's a single dominant firm and it's not you, then it will be very, very difficult to get economic advantage or strategic ground against your competitors. Now, if there's no single dominant firm, then that becomes interesting. That becomes the interesting playing field of strategists, because here we face very difficult strategic decisions. So we have many companies that compete, and there are competitive advantages, but the question is how to get those. And this is the bulk of this course will be focused on these situations where we have no single dominant firm, but we are fighting for gaining a competitive advantage. Next, we have to ask ourselves, so who cares? Who cares about strategy? Who is actually our audience? Who should we focus on when we develop our strategy? And here we have to look at stakeholders of the company. Stakeholders are defined as individuals and groups who can affect or are affected by the strategic outcomes achieved, and who have enforceable claims on a firm's performance. So who are those stakeholders? There are four large groups of stakeholders. The first group are capital market stakeholders. So these are basically the kind of people, companies that provide capital to our company. For example, the shareholders, but also major suppliers of capital, the banks and the debt holders for our business. That's the first group. The second group are product market stakeholders. So these are our customers, our suppliers, the host communities we are in, but also labor unions. The third group are organizational stakeholders, employees, managers and non-managers, for example, board members who govern the company. And the fourth group are institutional stakeholders, governments and non-governmental organizations. And you see from this chart that there's a number of stakeholders that we have to keep in mind when we write our strategy. And that also means writing a good strategy that addresses the needs and the wants of all these stakeholders is quite complex. Now, this course is about teaching strategy. And when you start teaching strategy, you have to ask yourself, is it actually possible to teach? Or is strategy something that is just there from birth? Is it an art or is it a science? And for me, when I thought about this question, the answer is it's actually neither nor. It's not an art really 100%. It's not really a science 100%. It's a bit of both. And the best way I could come up with to describe this is that strategy is a craft. It is something that you can learn. It is based on a process. It is based on tools and frameworks that you can actually learn, that you can follow. And yes, there is a little bit of art in it, and there's a little bit of science in it as well. But more than anything, strategy can be learned and strategy can be practiced. And this leads me to the final slide, which is the overview of what you can expect as part of this course. And this entire course is structured around the strategic management process. So the process starts with the goal and the aspiration that you set for the company. Then you go out and you study the external environment and the internal environment. In the external environment, we talk about the economy, we talk about the industry and the competition. And for the internal environment, we talk about our core competencies, our strengths, our weaknesses, and understand where we stand as a company. Based on this, and based on the goal and aspiration that we have, we develop a vision and a mission for the company. And that becomes the input for our strategy. Then we move on to the actual strategy formulation. And there's a couple of elements that we have to look at. We start off with a business level strategy and competitive rivalry and competitive dynamics. Then we move into a corporate level strategy. And here we look at specifically acquisitions and restructuring strategies. Finally, we look at two more specific strategies, which is international strategy and cooperative strategy. Then once we have formulated that strategy and have produced a proper plan and a proper document, then we move on to strategy implementation. And here are 4 areas that we have to look at. One is to translate our strategy into concrete strategic projects and initiatives. Then these projects also have a consequence on the organization structure and the controls that we put in place. Of course, we need to talk about budgeting and the financial planning, because all of our strategies have an impact on the finances of the company. And finally, more and more important nowadays becomes the aspect of sustainability and business ethics. So making sure that our strategy is also in line with our long-term sustainable goals and based on proper ethical principles. Now, if we do everything right here, then this will earn us above average returns. It will help us to beat most of the competition, be better than the average, and give us good, solid returns. And then the process starts over again. And with the next cycle, we need to set an aspiration and a goal again and go through the strategic management process again. So this is what we will cover as part of this course. Thank you so much for joining today's session, and I see you again soon.